Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Jarvis, and in this week's edition of What Works Wednesday, we have none other than John Mason, who anybody who attended XY Live and did good planning selection, like selected the good courses, saw John's presentation on surge meetings and all the great things he's done. And so, John, really so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Matt, thank you, and very kind words from XY Live. The Mason and Associates team put a whole lot of work into that presentation, and the feedback and the takeaways, the tangible action items that we were able to give, really rewarding to hear how many people thought it was great and a good use of their time.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I'm not just trying to flatter you. I mean, Mike and I, we've been talking about surge for a long time, and we saw that on the agenda, so we thought we would sneak into the back and just kind of sit in the back. And then right out of the gates or somewhere in there, John, you make some joke about like, hey, and Mike is probably doing 87 meetings a week, and we know Jarvis is doing 12, and Mike and I are in the back, and we're just like rolling on the floor, and we're ribbing each other. And it was, but joking aside, like you guys really went into the details of exactly what you did and the terminology you use in your office. I mean, there was nothing held back.
Oh, we're an open book, and we were really honored to have you there and had no idea what to expect, right? We knew you guys were there for the pre-con. We were like, well, maybe they're going to be there. Maybe they won't be there. Maybe I should make this joke. Maybe I shouldn't. And then it was like, well, you have to do surge justice, right? I mean, you guys talk about it all the time. And the fact that you sat there through the whole presentation was pretty cool. And I think you learned, I saw a LinkedIn post, I think you learned some things from the presentation, which is awesome too.
Yeah. Well, and it brings up a good point, right? And I know Mike and I have this podcast, but when you and we share, hey, here's what's working and here's what's not working. Like none of us have this dialed in completely, right? We're all evolving, and we're all like, I tried this and it didn't work, but I tried this and it worked really well.
Absolutely. I mean, over the course of time, like I always subscribe to the idea, if you can get one good idea from a conference from somebody else, and you can take that back and implement it in your own practice, you're going to end up so much better off. And there are so many things that you and Micah have talked about on your podcast that we've implemented, surge being one of them. And, we even do things differently. I think on one of your podcasts, you mentioned you don't do a ton of family stories in your surge meetings. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, because I make sure in our strategic planning meeting slide deck, I always have a picture of my 3-year-old. That way I can share those stories with clients when and if they ask. It doesn't have to be forced upon them, but I'm locked and loaded and ready for it if they ask the question. So just little nuances, and I'm sure you talk about the family too, but it's just thinking about what works for you, what works for me, and then making it the best of both worlds.
Oh, totally. Well, even like you mentioned, having a slide deck. So like I don't have a slide deck when I do client meetings, but you also have done, you sort of, I don't want to say force, that's too strong of a word, but you've really encouraged clients to be doing virtual meetings. In fact, do I recall correctly, like that's the bulk of your surge are virtual meetings?
Absolutely. We've been, I think out of all the meetings we did last season, we probably had less than 10 that were actually in person.
Wow.
So 350 or so virtual meetings among the 5 advisors here. And, it's still COVID, and 2 or 3 of our advisors were diagnosed with COVID in the middle of surge.
Oh, man.
And, if you're Micah and you're doing 87 surge meetings a week and you get COVID, that's 87 phone calls you have to make saying, I'm sorry. Right.
Yes.
And versus your 12, of course, no joking aside. But it was really cool because our advisors, they didn't miss a beat. They had COVID, they tested positive, they were able to continue those meetings for the week. We didn't have to apologize to anybody. And we still have folks pop by from time to time. We still have a physical office. And now that we just moved into our new space, it's cool to have clients pop by. We're giving them the tour. So we're not scared of humans, but we do really believe in those virtual surge meetings.
Yeah, it's so much more efficient. You don't have to worry about weather. You don't have to worry about traffic. But tell me a little bit. So as a team, you're doing 350 meetings in a surge cycle?
We are.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
350
so
meetings. And I think this year we're scheduled to go like April 17th to May 27th or so for our big surge. And so that's like 102 slots per advisor. Some advisors may need to extend a week or two to make sure they can get all their meetings in. But we're going for 17 meetings a week this year. And some of those, the complication is we have 2 advisors on the meeting. So like we talked about during our presentation at XY Live, we're implementing that succession plan too. And Surge is also really good for that.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Boy, there's so many different avenues we could go down. Tell us, so 17 meetings a week, how does that break down in like a week? How does an average Surge week work for you guys?
So Monday is basically prep day. So hopefully we've already done the bulk of the prep, and Monday's like that refresher, get locked and loaded for the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are the big days. I think we have 5 meetings a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then we pick up 2 on Friday, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, that's 2 on Friday. Now, something I noticed from your presentation is internally you don't call it Surge, do you? You've got a different term used internally.
We may use Surge internally, like with the advisors and our ops and relationship managers, but when we mention this to clients, we call it the strategic planning meeting season.
I love that. So clients are aware that you're meeting with the bulk of your clients in this period of time. Of course, you're not calling it Surge to them because it wouldn't really make sense, but you could say it again, strategic
planning meeting season.
Love that. And then you're doing that, you mentioned in April and May, and then again, again in the fall?
We actually don't have a dedicated fall Surge, but I'm in the middle of my fall Surge now. So we don't have one, but we're having one, which is another discussion point for next year when we go into our next iteration. So like everybody, it's November 7th. We're doing our end of year tax planning, Roth conversions, dishwasher rule, harvesting losses.
Yeah, RMDs,
if there were gains, we'd be doing that too. But it feels like a Surge without the benefit of being in Surge. So we're talking internally about maybe doing a fall Surge next year too. Not because it's necessary for the client advisor relationship as much as it maybe is more necessary for us to be more efficient at what we're doing. Yeah. So right now we're in like mini Surge and we're doing all of those end of year meetings.
Are you then proactively reaching out to clients just kind of like, hey, we need to get together once a year, and if they need to see you a second time, that's fine? Or what's your approach on that?
So every January, we send out an actual physical piece of mail. And that physical mail, we call it like the mailer. And then the mailer contains inserts as well. So the mailer basically says, dear client, Happy New Year. This is when we're doing strategic planning meeting season. Here are the days. Here are the times. On February 15th, for example, we'll send you an email via Constant Contact with the link to schedule your meeting with your advisor. And within like 48 hours, probably 33% of those are booked, if not more. So we do one email campaign, basically. We give it 2 weeks, and then we resend the email, and then we follow up with phone calls. And I'm sure we stole that from somebody, that template, but it seems to be working well for us. And then the little wrinkle there, Matt, is if there's a joint advisor, we send those links out a week earlier.
Sure, before the overlap spots get filled up.
Exactly.
That's awesome, man. I'm just super nerding out on this. The email call, I think the earliest I've ever heard of that was Bill Good. Did you ever read Bill Good's books back in the day? Yeah, that's probably, yeah. I'm sure like Jay Abraham was doing it 50 years ago, but well, not email, but that's awesome. That's classic stuff. Okay, so everybody comes in during strategic planning meeting season, and then you mentioned kind of right now throughout the rest of the year, it's a little bit hit and miss, and so you're going to decide next year, are those really defined times?
Yeah, so we're very active in the tax planning side of things. So in the Q1, as we're prepping for, we call it SPM season for short. So when we're doing that preparation, we're also reviewing tax returns as they're coming in. So that's part of Q1. Q2 is basically executing Surge.
Sure.
Q3 is implementation mode. So update your estate plan, whatever those recommendations were that developed during that meeting, get those done in the third quarter, and then wrap up the fourth quarter with whatever end of year tax planning. So we do have multiple touch points throughout the year, but like that one big dedicated, let's have a meeting. We find, Matt, probably 50%. I'll give you an example. Right now, I sent an email today that said, dear Mr. and Mrs. Client, here's your tax projection. It looks good. It also looks good for next year. I recommend we do a Roth conversion. Should I send you the forms or would you like to talk about it? And it's about 50-50.
Yep.
50% say send me the forms, 50% say we want to talk about it. So we're offering that. So that's what we're vacillating with is like, do we force that second meeting or a third meeting on somebody who maybe doesn't want it and just wants the paperwork.
Yeah. Well, it's a great idea to just give them the choice, right? Hey, do you want to talk about this? Because some clients don't, right? We know this, right? Some are real delegators. That, John, whatever you say, that's what we're going to do. Other clients, well, they want to go into the weeds a little bit more. So it definitely is a bit of a balance. I don't mean to bounce all over the place, but with 5 advisors on your team, was it a struggle to kind of convince everyone or to kind of get everyone on board to this approach?
Amazingly, we probably talked about it for 6 months. And it was also at the same time that we were breaking away from our broker dealer. So we left the broker dealer and we implemented Surge basically simultaneously. And all of that was also in the middle of COVID. So this was like overlap 2020 and 2021. And I think we had just had it. And Mike and Ken, the founders, they were like, let's just go for it, man. Let's just do it. This makes sense. I was like, well, everybody says we should do baby steps. And they were like, we're just doing it.
That's
We're
awesome.
going for it. And we just all went for it together and figured, we would make the leap and take a leap of faith. And our clients were amazing. They, I don't think we had any negative feedback when we switched from doing reviews throughout the year to compressing them. I don't think we had one negative feedback because it made more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot more sense. Well, and kudos to the other partners in the firm for being willing to take such a big step. We've often worked with firms, especially multi-generational firms, right, where one group or the other will want to try something, the other group won't. So, again, mad props to you guys for pulling it all off at once.
Mike and Ken are amazing. So they are both in their 60s. They're 3 years and a day apart. And they're brothers,
I was just say they're brothers. That's right. Because I remember I pulled your ADV during the middle of the session because that's what I do. And I'm like, there's a glitch on the ADV. They used the same person's picture twice. And I went back and looked. Nope.
Oh, they're almost identical. 3 years and a day, same hairdo, same color, everything. They've been amazing. And Tommy and Ben would echo, as well as our team, that it's not always the first time where you present an idea that they want to implement it.
Oh, well, sure.
My dad, Mike, his favorite thing is, in the shower this morning, I had this great idea. I said, oh, you did? Tell me
Really?
about that. Tell me about that great idea that I mentioned to you 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's a true thing, though, right? Like you and I, we're both multi-generational practices. Like we can laugh about that. But, at the end of the day, what are we solving for? It's like who originated surge meetings. It doesn't really matter who came first. But if we can learn from each other and if we're making progress, that's awesome.
It's been really cool to see them implement everything like technology. Like if you had asked Mike and Ken, are we going to ever do Zoom meetings? The answer would have been emphatically no.
Of course.
They've been converted. They love the Zoom meetings. And so just being willing and able to learn the technology. And from this podcast and Kits' technology map, I mean, the second you take a break on technology for even a day, you can't get caught up again. And they've stayed up with the times, which is awesome.
Well, and especially with a team your size, that's amazing. Do you mind, John, talking a little bit, I want to pivot just a little bit, talking about, you mentioned a couple of times having joint meetings with advisors, kind of handing off some relationships. How has that process gone? What have you learned through that process?
It's been really awesome. So the initial kind of like handoff, so I started in 2010. So okay. 2011, fully licensed, CFP, et cetera. Most of I was responsible for 100% of plan preparation and basically all the work for both Mike and Ken.
Wow.
And so the initial handoff started probably back in like 2014 or 15, where if I had been on a relationship long enough, I was already 5 or 6 years in, I could just kind of run with it. So that was like the first handoff, like mid to late 20s. And it wasn't really a handoff because I'd always been there, but they kind of just took a step away.
Yeah.
This next transition is the big one because we hired Tommy and Ben, Tommy in 2019, Ben at the beginning of this year. And now Mike and Ken's retirement is 10 years closer than it was when I started.
Yeah.
So these transitions are happening a little bit faster. And Surge has been awesome for that because I think Ben sat on 60 meetings this year.
Really?
So he went from not knowing any Mason clients, not knowing anything about federal employees, other than what he was learning on our podcast, to all of a sudden ingrained in 60 relationships, knows our system, knows federal employees. And ever since Surge, all of those clients are now emailing him.
Are they really? Because that's really the sign of you've made that successful transition when they say, oh, this is my guy to reach out to.
It happens so fast. And I think just like that confidence in getting better and better at each meeting Mike and Ken will probably still be there next year, I think is the plan to at least have one more year of transition.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to take three. I don't think it will. I don't think it has taken 3 years. I think the transition is basically done. But Mike and Ken have had these relationships for decades, some of them. They're not just going to step away at this point.
No. Boy, that really, and I'm not just trying to blow smoke here, but that really speaks again a lot to what you've built as a firm. And you and I know a lot of younger advisors as well that thought that's what was going to happen. And then 5 years in, 10 years now, the senior advisor is still doing all the relationship. There's been no handoff of credibility. There's been no handoff of duties. So again, mad props to Mike and Ken and John and yourself for what you guys have built. That's phenomenal.
Thank you. It's we just got back. We were in Colorado, obviously, for the XY Live, and then we went over to. Do you know about the Incline? And I think it's something Manitou Falls or Manitou Springs, maybe. It's right by Pikes Peak, and the Incline is like 2,500 feet elevation change in 0.9 miles.
Wow.
It's nuts. And I believe
like a ski slope. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe the highest is 60% grade. So it's like going up a ladder. Anyhow, it's a huge climb. And the other day we were having an internal meeting and I said, at least with the incline, you just have to keep going up. I said, there's no roadmap for building the perfect RIA. There's no roadmap for how to execute a succession plan. Like there's ideas.
Yeah.
But it's like going straight uphill, but not knowing where you're going sometimes. And that's why what you guys do is so valuable. The XY conference, learning from other peers, because sometimes that next step's not so easy.
Totally not. And I think to take your analogy one step further, right? There's not really a destination on what we're doing, right? As we've talked about this whole episode, it's all right. Whatever we did this surge cycle that worked, how do we turn it up just a little bit more, and how do we turn it up more?
Yeah, you never reach the summit. You just keep going.
Boy, there's so many avenues we can go down. We're going to have to do a few more of these episodes. Like I'd love to get deeper into your succession, having 5 advisors planning at once. But what are some key takeaways or some action items you would give to listeners? So I know you had some great takeaways from your presentation on surge meetings, but for the audience at large, action items, what are things that you would say, hey, no matter where you're at, start implementing this?
Well, the big thing, Matt, is I read, I listen. What I quoted during the XY conference was one of my favorite quotes from an RV couple. They're called Keep Your Daydream. And one of their sayings is start small, start now. And in the RV world, it means go tent camping if you can afford a tent. Or if you have an F-150, take a pop-up. Don't wait for the super duper class A. Don't wait for the massive F-450. Just start making memories today. And the correlation to that with the listeners of the TPR podcast or the folks that attended XY Live is take that one good idea and implement it. And you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And take that one good idea, implement it, start making those small incremental changes in your business today. Everything's going to be all right as long as you just do it. And your clients are going to be okay with it. And understanding that mistakes are happening just gives you an opportunity to improve on it next time.
I love it. Start small, start now. I guess one thing I want to highlight from your story is that there will always be a reason to not start, right? You guys were doing your broker-dealer change, and then COVID hit, and I'm sure there was 100 other things that were going on at the same time. There will always be a reason to not start, but I think, John, to your point, start small, start now.
And the Mason saying is don't let perfect get in the way of good enough.
Yeah. Boy,
and what we mean by that is it's not like you're not trying to be perfect, but sometimes you just have to do it. Like the first time we did Surge wasn't perfect and it was still highly successful. If we had thought about it for 3 years now, think of all that time we would have wasted waiting for perfect. So don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. Start small, start now. So much good content, you, Micah, and everybody else out there that can be implemented one day at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah. I love that example of Surge, right? Because even if you had spent 3 years studying it, you learned more in your first Surge cycle than you could ever look. I mean, there's a lot you can learn from these podcasts. I know that you do a podcast, a great podcast on federal employee benefits. There's a lot you can learn from that, but ultimately you've got to do it. You've got to be in the trenches and make it happen.
Do you think because you have kids, right?
Yeah, 3 of them. Yeah.
Do you think any book that you ever read about kids prepared you for being a parent like that? No way. And no podcast is going to prepare you for Surge. You just got to do it.
Nope, that's true. There's definitely a lot of books that I enjoyed along the way, but nothing prepares you for actually doing it like doing it. Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for your time, for your presentation at XY, for your time on this podcast. And to all our listeners, please follow John's advice. Start small, start now, and don't let perfect get in the way. Wait. It was
Don't let perfect get in the way of good enough.
don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. I love it. Well, until next time, happy planning.